Will the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for Wednesday, October 17, 2018, please come to order? For the benefit of those who may not have participated in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, our procedures are as follows. We will read the legal call of the meeting as published in the local newspapers. The applicant will be invited to come forward and present the case, explaining to the Commission and others present what is being requested of this property. Comments of town agencies will be read for each application if there are any. There will be clarifying questions from commissioners. Then there will be the opportunity for clarifying questions from the audience. First, those who wish to support the application may come forward. Second, those who oppose the application will be invited to come forward and express their opinions. As this is a public hearing, it must be recorded. It is necessary for speakers to identify themselves, state their name and address before addressing the commission. The applicant is then free to leave or remain for the balance of the public hearing and the regular meeting, at which time the commission will try to reach a decision on each application. Each applicant will be notified in writing as to the decision of the commission and has the right to appeal in Superior Court if desired. Decisions of this meeting are available the day after the meeting by calling the Planning and Zoning Office, 453-8039, after 9 a.m. Seated this evening are the following members: Sean Cosgrove, Matt Yurzinski, I'm Phil Johnson, Frank DeAndrea, Alan Brown, Josh Hirschman, Jason Marchi, and Scott Edmond. Let's see, staff present: George Kroll, Lisa Piombino. Our videographer is Peter Schultze. As there was no legal published notice, we will move straight to our meeting.
You have state members here.
Right.
Only 7 can be seated.
So Jason will actually
Okay.
be the alternate.
Okay.
Thank you. So, first item on the agenda, 66 High Street.
Yes, good evening. My name again, Ronald Nault, professional engineer with Luke's Consulting Engineers, the site designer for the 66 High Street project. At the first public information meeting, public hearing, I went through kind of the chronology of the site approval, former factory zoned industrial conversion to residential condominiums. As part of the process for approval, actually as a condition of approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission, the requirement was added to provide a fire department security access road along the back side of the LEET building. In that area, and as part of the initial application to the town and to deep under the CAM process, initial site wall had been shown along the backside of the Whitfield building. When the request came to provide the fire department access road along the backside of LEET, the wall was extended to support the road. The fire department asked for, I think, a 16-foot wide access along the backside. So it's quite tight along this side. Since that time, DEEP has visited the site. They have issued a request, an order for us to remove a portion of the center wall here that was not part of the fire department access road. Okay with this portion of the wall in that area and leaving the wall behind Whitfield. So we're in the nexus between deep jurisdiction below the high tide line, the coastal jurisdiction line, and the town that regulates upland of that. So the wall issue is also part of this revised site plan application. In addition, from the original request, we had a community recreation area always planned and approved in the area between LEET and Whitfield, far away from any neighbors, only adjacent to the bend in the upland property in this area. And we had shown a gazebo as part of the process of offering the condominiums for sale. Many potential buyers requested a pool be added, so part of our application before you is to add a pool shown appropriately in blue. That pool location is actually further from the marsh area than the gazebo that was approved. The pool is set back more than 25 feet from the tidal wetlands. Supporting the pool would be an adjacent structure that would house changing rooms, bathroom, and shower as required by public health code. That's shown here in support in that area. The pool is shielded from neighbors and public view, again, by the Leet and Whitfield buildings in that area. Excuse me. And that's the second part of our application is to add the pool element to the community recreation area in the same general location. In the process of submitting the application, the town received review comments from DEEP under the coastal area management process. The DEEP reviewer, if I'm getting her name properly, is Carol Shemansky. And in addition to, she didn't really have much to say about the pool or the wall. The wall removal is an exact response to an associate of hers at DEEP, Kevin Zavoy, who asked that we remove limits of the wall, and we've agreed to his exact request. That is a separate permit at DEEP that's pending now. It's been submitted for his review and approval, quite a bureaucratic process in working with DEEP, as you might know. But one final comment that I'd like to address is that she requested, as I understand that she does on all CAM applications, that public access be granted. And so I believe at the last meeting, someone read into the record her letter to the town. I've since written a response to the town that's part of the public record as well, dated September 28th. But and so that's for everyone to view. There's not much disagreement on the wall. We're proposing to remove the wall that DEEP wishes us to remove. But let me, from an exact segment of the letter to DEEP, we also disagree that a public access requirement is either warranted or appropriate. Neither the site plans nor conditions have materially changed since the original approval. While yes, a successful Phragmites control program has opened the views of the tidal wetlands, as has previously been determined by local authorities, there is no local need for or interest in public access to or through this site. It has not been identified in a municipal plan of development or zoning regulations for any water-dependent use. Further, public access would be inconsistent with the private residential nature of the development and its adjacent neighbors. There is insufficient area to adequately separate the private use from public access were it to be included, nor would such access be inviting or desirable under such circumstances. Further, there are other options for meaningful public access to tidal resources that exist nearby, but note that this site does not link to any of those sites to provide a continuum of access. I'd just also like to remind the Commission that DEEP requested public access at the initial site plan application process back in 2015, and at that time, public access was not granted, and it would be difficult to see a path where you would add public access now to the 3/4 of the project having been completed, and I think unfair to the residents who purchased in good faith the site as it was approved at P&Z back in 2015. So that's the only supplemental comments I had tonight. I'm not sure the exact process, but if there's any questions for me, I'll be here to answer.
George, do we have the original comment? Obviously, the Planning and Zoning Commission did not feel that the public access with the original proposed project was something they wanted to require. Do we have the original comments, and are they similar to what they are now?
The original comments from Carol?
Yeah.
I don't believe we have those in our file. I know that she did request the public access, which has, I think Ron said, is a standard part of their coastal site plan review, and the commission did not require public access. I don't remember any specific discussion of that issue, but we did not require it.
I think one of the points raised, I'm not sure by whom, was that public access would have potential impact on the neighborhood, not just the development.
I believe so. And what I explained at the initial public hearing was that the site is not a gated community. The public often walks through the property. There's no plan to change that access. We think it would be in everyone's best interest not to officially add public access to the project. Just leave it as it is now. The neighbors walk through the property currently. One thing I should also mention, just to make sure that what seems obvious to me, but the wall in question, the removal of the wall and the removal of this wall and the maintenance of this wall does not change the inland drainage aspects of the project. There's the site drainage is mostly localized to this property. We do pick up a catch basin at the corner of South Fair and High Street, and bring that into the project and through the project, and directly outlet it to the marsh. That's storm drainage system, I argue, works better than it used to. The old system wasn't maintained. It used to dead end onto the old 66 High Street factory property without a proper outlet. It'll be properly outletted directly to the marsh in that fashion. Nor does the wall change any of the hydrodynamics of a coastal flood that would affect the area, the property itself, and the adjacent neighbors as well. It's a 3-foot-high single precast concrete block wall. Where it's not a major structure. It's more to retain the earth to support the fire truck access that was required.
Is it safe to say that basically we're just kind of cleaning up DEP approvals?
That's correct. We're mirroring DEP's request, I guess.
Getting the paperwork straightened out. Any questions from commissioners? Would anyone in the audience like to ask a clarifying question? Would anybody like to speak? Oh, sorry. Please come forward, state your name. Obviously, the microphone is not amplified. It's just for the GCTV. So if you could be as clear as possible, would be great.
Sure. My name is Hazel Carby, and I live at 27 South Fair Street. My clarifying question is, could someone explain what the chemical composition of the water in the pool would be, and what procedures or processes have been put in place in terms of a major storm and that chemical water being a storm actually taking that chemical water and putting it into the marshlands, and what the effect would be? Thank you.
Sure.
The pool is proposed as a saltwater pool. It would fall under the jurisdiction of DEEP, again, under discharge of any pool water, but it wouldn't be using chemicals, chlorine chemicals, as its disinfectant. So actually probably pretty close to the salinity of the adjacent marsh.
Does that help? Thank you. Okay. Any other clarifying questions from the audience? Would anyone like to speak in favor of the application?
Good evening. My name is Dan Dombrowski. I live in Unit 22 at 66 High Street. I'm in favor of the application, but I do object to any requirement that the property be labeled as a public access site. For parking reasons, potential litter reasons, just the site is not built for that type of use, and I just think it would not only be difficult for the residents of High Street, but also for the adjacent community to have an influx of cars and people to the site for that reason. I also have letters from other unit holders from High Street that are unable to come here tonight, and if I could give that to the commission, that would be great.
Certainly. Would anyone else like to speak in favor of the application? Would anyone like to speak against it? Come on up.
My name is Hazel Carby, and I live at 27 South Fair Street. But a neighbor who couldn't actually be here tonight has asked me to read a statement on her behalf. And this person is Amy Goldfarb, and she lives at 49 South Fair Street, and requests that this statement be entered into the record, please.
Okay.
There are copies there for everybody. Okay, so this is the voice of Amy Goldfarb. Dear Planning and Zoning Committee, for 3 years we've been watching and hearing the development go up at 66 High Street, and we've probably got another 2 years to go. We've begun to meet our new neighbours as they enjoy walking through the neighbourhood, admiring the well-cared-for historic homes and the many beautiful gardens. 66 High Street is also very attractive, a great improvement over what was there before. Aerial photos show just how beautifully situated the condos are, with long views across the marshes. While there are other places to view the water in Guildford, none are within easy walking distance of our neighbourhood or part of our neighbourhood fabric. Back when Ken Horton and Ron Nolt were preparing to make their site proposal to the town, they held several meets and greets to build relationships with people in the neighbourhood. In an attempt to make us feel comfortable with what lay ahead, they offered a number of assurances. They would plant dense rows of trees to provide full screening of their garage landscape. They would power wash our houses to take care of construction dust. They would make sure their lighting didn't shine too brightly into our windows at night. And they would give us pedestrian access to their walkways along the marshes. Some of these assurances were pictured in mock-ups. Others were verbal. None were in writing. At the time, we didn't think they needed to be. I myself never went to the early planning and zoning meetings because I felt so comfortable with the neighbourly approach of 66 High. Over time, some of us have had to make our peace with the many promises that never materialized. Fortunately, there is one promise that could still be fulfilled. It would be very nice to be able to have some access to the walkways that give such stunning views of the marshes. This would be a generous and truly neighbourly way for the developers to allow for a fuller interplay between the condo development and the surrounding neighbourhood. The condos at 66 High Street enhance the aesthetics of our neighbourhood and may increase our property values. But I'm also certain that the care with which we in the neighbourhood have taken care of our houses over decades, and the fact that we have lawfully abided by the rules of the historic district, rules which are often challenging and expensive to conform to, enhance the aesthetics and the property values of the condos at 66 High Street. By allowing some public access, the developers could make the condos a true part of the neighbourhood in the town that they say they love, not a separate, exclusive, essentially gated enclave. At the last hearing, Mr. Nolt gave us a verbal assurance that we would be able to walk along the marshes. Mr. Nault is a pleasant guy, and I know he means to be sincere. But we have seen the developers back away from other important promises that they made with equal-sounding sincerity. Therefore, I would like to ask that they give us that assurance in writing. Unfortunately, our experiences have taught us that we cannot count on them not to change their minds about access in the future, if it is not in writing. And according to George Kroll, whom I spoke with 2 weeks ago, if public access is not explicitly granted, then anyone who walks through the development is trespassing. I am concerned that the developers seem to want to discourage public access, as demonstrated in their comments here 2 weeks ago, and I would add, and again tonight, and in their permit application to DEEP dated May the 25th, 2018. In their application, they assert, quote, "This site is not suited for public access. The views and vistas are limited both in general and specifically by the Phragmites visual barrier. As such, there is no demand for public access to or through the site," unquote. To the contrary, the site is suited for public access. Sidewalks connect the adjacent neighborhood with the development. The views and vistas are open and beautiful. Just ask anyone who lives at 66 High. And there is demand for public access. I'm sure there won't be hordes of people who drive into town just to walk into the development and see the views. Most people will continue to use the recreational areas at Town Dock, Chaffinch Island, and Jacobs Beach. But just as the residents of 66 High enjoy walking up and down High Street, Norton Street, South Fair Street, and beyond, those of us who live in the neighborhood should be able to follow our sidewalks into 66 High and enjoy an occasional stroll along the gorgeous tidal wetlands. DEEP has recommended this, and I urge the committee to support it. Again, that's from Amy Goldfarb.
Yes, sir. Please come forward.
My name is Jim Blank. I live at 66 High Street, Unit 5. I'd like to read into one of the other unit owners, their comments, because I think it addresses some of that. But before I do, while I understood the letter that was just read, I think Ms. Goldfarb did forget some of the things that Ken and Ron did do that weren't part of it, which specifically were just pointed towards her, which were taking down trees that she requested that were 50 feet high in her yard, and also taking down a rotted clubhouse that was in her yard, and he did that at no cost to her. Additionally, there's an adjacent driveway, and on Ken's behalf and Ron's behalf, they repaved the surface completely at no expense to either the unit homeowners. So while I can understand it, I think to be selective on what may be perceived as what was promised and what wasn't, and what was given and what wasn't, should all be read into the record as well. So having said that, Peter Hawes is not here. He read, he was at the last meeting. So his comments were, I was at the last meeting and heard the discussions about public access. As I understand it, there's a difference between public access, as in we let neighbors, et cetera, walk onto and through the property as a courtesy, and public access, as defined by the state DEEP. The public access label, as defined by DEEP, comes with the requirement that we make the property fully accessible to any and everyone at essentially all times, and that we also may need to provide parking and other facilities for the public to view the marsh. It also would put us on the state map of public coastal access sites, increasing the chances that people will actively seek us out as a destination for enjoying the views. Since I cannot attend the meeting, I request that the following letter be submitted to the hearing if you think it would be helpful. My name is Peter Hawes. I'm a resident of 66 High Street, Unit 4. Condominium 66 High Street opened in 2016, and we've had an open campus policy with respect to our neighbors and other community members. People have been welcome to walk onto the property, to take in the views of the marsh, walk their dogs, or just stroll through. Kids from the neighborhood have ridden bikes in the parking lot, and local residents have used our driveway to get between South Fair Streets and Norton Avenue. We generally are happy to maintain this type of informal, good neighborly access to our property, but we strongly oppose designating any portion of property public access under state rules or guidelines. The likely burden to the residents in terms of privacy, parking, noise, litter, and potentially crime would be onerous and negatively affect our quality of life and property values along with us and the surrounding neighborhood. Furthermore, as a small parcel of land in a tight neighborhood, our property cannot support the infrastructure and traffic that would come with being designated public access point, nor could the surrounding neighborhood with its narrow roads and on-street parking. We encourage the town to approve the proposal for the pool at 66 High Street without agreeing to the designation of any portion of 66 High Street as publicly accessible property, and that parking could severely affect all the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please come forward.
I'm Michael Denning from 27 South Fair Street. I have copies. I'll just read this. I wish to speak against the 67 High Street application for a new retaining wall, swimming pool, and picnic pavilion, all of which represent dramatic extensions of the original plan approved in 2015. At the time, the town made exceptions for increased residential density and building height. Now the applicant wants to extend the total built footprint of the development further, an example of mission creep. In addition, as we've heard, as Connecticut Deep notes in their consent order, the applicant built a substantial seawall without, quote, a certificate or permit from the commissioner and without, quote, a lawful coastal site plan approval from the town of Guilford. As a result, the applicant has been ordered to remove the sections of the wall inside the coastal wetlands and to, quote, restore the site to pre-work or better condition, including establishing a stable vegetated slope and restore any tidal wetland impact. In their February 2015 presentation of the development to the neighbors, the applicant wrote, and I quote, "The site plan provides," this is what you told the rest of the neighbors at a meeting down there that I was at, and we have the text of it. The site plan provides for an extensive walk system, establishes a sensitive landscape of marsh grasses, lawns, and more intensively planted areas, transitioning from the more formal within the enclosed courtyard to completely natural bordering the marsh. A complete network of handicap-accessible walkways and greenways encircle the property and are connected to the town's sidewalk system by a crosswalk at the High and South Fair Street entrance, unquote. In opposing the new application, I ask that the applicant stand by these earlier promises to the neighborhood and the community, and particularly 3 points. The border between the development and the marsh should be left, in the applicant's words, as completely natural, or in the more exact words of Deep, as a stable vegetated slope. A seawall was never suggested in the applicant's presentation to the community, and such a new seawall is not in keeping with Guilford's long-term coastal resilience plan, which stresses the use of, quote, living shorelines and, quote, tidal wetland buffers. There has been no study of the consequences of such a wall for other non-walled properties bordering the marsh and the wetlands. We have nothing but your what you think might happen. So we asked that planning and zoning require the removal of the entire retaining wall and the restoration of the area as a living shoreline and a tidal wetland buffer, what we were promised there. Similarly, that site plan did not imagine a pool or a pavilion in the small, unbuilt-up area between the development and the marsh, an area that was promised to be, quote, completely natural, quote, a network of walkways and greenways. And third and finally, the original promise was that those and I quote here, those walkways and greenways connected to the town's sidewalk system would, quote, enhance pedestrian opportunities in the town center South Historic District. So I endorse DEEP's call for public access to these walkways and greenways. Thank you.
Just as a point of clarification, the blocks, as I understand it, as they were placed, really were done so to enhance safety and allow for fire truck access to be able to safely do that. I mean, I assume that you'd be in favor of having this be as safe as possible? I mean, I know it's kind of like a no-win
Well,
question.
the difficulty was that the plan was so much was stuck, as indeed someone just spoke from 66 High Street, that it's such a small area, which is why they don't want to allow the public access, but that's precisely what creates this difficulty. But I think that the serious issue of whether or not this should be a vegetated slope, the natural kind of living shoreline, which the coastal resilience plans recommend for Guilford as we face a rising shoreline and a rising seawall all around there. We've known from Sandy and Irene that the waters have come right up in the backyards of houses along South Fair Street and High Street and the other ones, and this just seems to be not in the interests of the town and the neighborhood generally.
That being said, the DEP, I believe, has approved the placement of the blocks along the side of the road to shore that up.
We have not yet heard that the DEP,
Okay.
as of 2 weeks ago, we were
But
still
that's
waiting for
still in
whether
process?
DEP, yes.
It's still in process.
And certainly in the consent decree, it seems as if the only reason the DEP did not ask for the removal of the rest of the wall is because it was not in their jurisdiction. It was on the other side of the coastal line. They just asked for the removal of the stuff that crossed the coastal line. The stuff that is on the other side of the coastal line was, as I understood it, not part of their jurisdiction, but part of the town's jurisdiction. But according to the DEEP consent order, there was no town approval of building that wall on the upland side of it. Okay?
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? Would you like to address or
Just,
reject?
no, I'd just like to provide hopefully clarification, not disagreeing per se, but perhaps just the understanding by the public and the neighbors of the phasing of a construction project. The area discussed with handicapped accessible walkways is still part of the project, is to be completed as part of the project, but in the process of construction, it exists now as a lay-down area for materials. But this whole back lawn area, that you can see the walkways shown that will encircle that whole area, that whole marsh coastline will be left in its natural state. These are where the handicapped accessible walkways are proposed as part of the project to be completed without question. That's the area. The wall was part of the original site plan in this location here. Also, to note that perhaps, and if Amy were here, I think she would agree that also part of a project, we have a complete landscaping plan that's part of the approval that through the areas where the construction's been completed, the trees have been planted in those areas, along here, for instance, along the backside adjacent to Amy's property, as someone mentioned, she requested, and we went on her property and removed old big dead trees, and we also then planted trees on her property at her request ahead of schedule, ahead of time, to try to help her through the construction process. The other portions of the landscaping plan will still be completed, but I'm surprised she would say that we didn't live up to our promises, because specifically we went onto her property and did even more than we were asked. So bear with us on the walkways and the natural shoreline over in this area. This portion of the wall will be removed, and that wall was part of the requirement for fire department access.
Would anyone else like to speak against the application? Oh, well, if you'd like to speak for it, come forward also.
Hi. So my name is Kathy Maniello. I'm a resident of 66, and I love my home. I love the Horton Group. In my experience, they've lived up to every one of my expectations. So to hear, and also every morning I get my dog on her leash and I walk down Fair Street, I walk down High Street, and I form some nice relationships. I haven't had a chance to meet these folks. But to hear that you feel that the Horton Group has not lived up to expectations, it hurts. I know they are residents of the town. They care deeply about the residents of 66 High Street and the community. I don't profess to know anything about the regulations and DEEP and anything else, but I just want to personally attest to the Horton Group and their desire to make this a great community, not only for residents, but for the neighbors. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak either in favor or against the application?
I'm sure you recall that DEEP has requested that you not take action on this application, that you table any further consideration of it until they have granted the permit under the consent decree.
Procedurally, will we close and then table?
Correct.
Without discussion?
Right.
And then when we get the DEP final understanding and agreement, we would have our discussion, deliberation, and vote.
Right, that's what DEEP is recommending.
Could I just add one alternate for consideration? The DEEP action is completely in response, so the consent order that DEEP has sent, copied to the town, requires us to remove in specific numbers, 140 feet of the center wall, retain 160 feet of this wall, it's all specifically spelled out, and our plan represents and reflects exactly what the consent order requests, and that's their only action, is the wall. They're not involved in the pool, they're not involved in public access at the coastal jurisdiction level. So my request is that while it's fresh in your mind, that a path perhaps could be that you discuss and vote on the application with a condition that no permit be granted for any of the work until we obtain DEEP approval for the removal of the... DEEP is involved really just in these segments of the wall, not the pool, not any other aspect. That because a DEEP permit application can take months at times. We've submitted the application. They've requested, and we're working closely with Kevin Zavoy. I would imagine that if Erin were here, she'd confirm that. I think she's had discussions. But we would welcome a condition that if you approve the application, that it not be, that no permit be granted until the time that DEEP approves the permit. And if that were to require any change, we'd have to be back before you. But we just wish that while you're sitting here, while the commission is in its current configuration, because we might lose members, not have quorums, and all those kind of things.
The concern I have is that they come, like, if there was sentiment here either for or against the public access, and we say, fine, we approve, but it's going to be subject to all of the DEP conditions, and there still comes back with public access, you could potentially be hamstrung on that. So I think it would probably be potentially more advised, and hopefully you're farther down the road than months with them, it might be advisable to kind of get that hammered out before we...
So the deep consent order has nothing to do with public access. The public access came, as part of every coastal application, the town automatically has to refer it to deep for a CAM review. And as George mentioned, Carol or CAM, almost as a footnote of every review, requests public access. The town hardly ever grants it. We think it's especially unfair to, in the middle of a project that you didn't require it before, to all of a sudden require it. We ask that you not grant the official public access, as someone pretty well illuminated. And my story that I mentioned at the previous public information meeting, I live on Bayberry Lane, down off of Trolley Road, and all of a sudden Deep showed that the very end of Trolley Road is a fine area for state public access. And on busy weekends, you can hardly you can't find a place to park, hardly move down there because it's now been identified. And I don't think that it's fair to the residents of 66 High Street or even of the neighbors to all of a sudden put this little bit of marsh view on a state public access map. We have confirmed that we invite the public, the neighbors, to walk through the property. It's not a gated community, just as I think many would say that they do, and we just maintain the neighborly, what do they call it, open house format of the development as it exists now, and not grant the state public access.
Thoughts from commissioners? I mean, I kind of would like to have it tied up by the deep, but I understand their desire to kind of move things forward.
Close the public hearing.
Right. So,
I move we close the public hearing.
certainly, before we close. Please do.
I guess the question is what actually are sidewalks? Are sidewalks considered public access? For every sidewalk in Guilford, there isn't something on a state thing that says there's public access here, but people walk up and down. Those are part of people's private property. We actually have to repair our sidewalks, don't we, and shovel our sidewalks? You guys know this better than I do, but I guess, because it seems to me that in some sense what Amy in particular was talking about, and the question that she asked George and got the answer on, was, are those walkways being treated as sidewalks and as walkways? Or could 5 years or 10 years from now, with a different set of people there, it turns into a gated community, which I think is the worry of those in the neighborhood. So I guess if there's some answer to whether they could be sidewalks.
Got a motion to close. Did anyone second? All in favor? Technically, George, do we go to the next item?
Right.
And then we'll do discussion later. So Guilford Agricultural Society, 111 Lovers Lane, map 40, lot 138, zone R3. Special permit request for modification of existing special permit conditions regarding scheduling and types of events. Special permit request to construct 4 accessory structures over 750 square feet has been withdrawn.
It's been a couple of months since we had the first public hearing on this application. If you'd like, I can summarize where this stands. You have in your packets some information that I'm going to be referring to regarding this application. This originally submitted, there were kind of 2 parts to the Agricultural Society application. One part was to modify the conditions of approval that relate to the types of uses that can occur at the fairground. And the second part was to develop additional barn buildings as part of the fairgrounds facilities. The part of the application relating to the barns and buildings has been withdrawn. However, we're still before you is the question of the revisions to the special permit conditions. I think in your packet you have a document, the first page of which I'll refer to last. The first page is the text of the application to modify the conditions of approval that were submitted by the Ag Society back during the summer, in August, I believe. The second document is the notice of special permit that was granted on May 26, 1989. The condition of that special permit is listed as item number 5, and says conditions that the uses of this property be limited to agricultural fairs, craft shows, auto shows, etc. Part of the request of the Ag Society is to modify that condition. The third page of this packet is the special permit that was granted in 2016. Condition number 2 of that special permit describes, attempts to describe the types of events that can occur on the property. And condition number 5, that's also part of that approval, has to do with the Ag Society submitting a description of booked events in order to allow us to enforce the conditions of approval with regard to the types of events. So the Ag Society requested that condition number 5 of the original approval be modified to eliminate. They don't give us the specific language that they want, but they are requesting that the limitation of nonprofit activities be eliminated, allowing for-profit uses along with nonprofit uses. And then they say, by example, such as weddings, reunions, and receptions. And then they also ask, as part of that request from the summer, the first public hearing, they want, requesting that the special permit from 2016 be modified to remove condition number 2, which, as I mentioned, attempts to describe and limit the type of activities that can occur on the site. So that's where we are today. That you may recall there was a lot of testimony about this application from the summer, but we're now at the second public hearing.
To summarize, they want to
Excuse me.
basically allow for-profit, the conditions of the original special permit.
Right.
They want to take that off, and then they want to basically eliminate the conditions of the special permit from 2016.
Yes.
And I was here, Frank was here, and Josh was here, but the rest of the commissioners, were you here for that also? Yes. Could you kind of just quickly summarize how we got to this special permit condition on 16 and how that came about?
Yeah, I'll try to at the time, earlier in the year in 2016, there was a lot of neighborhood concern about the extent of activities at the fairgrounds. There seemed to be an increase in the level of activity at the fairgrounds. There were events that people found to be objectionable because of noise, primarily. One of the more noteworthy examples was the Renaissance Fair. There was a series of events that went on for several weeks in a row that created a lot of anxiety in the neighborhood. So there was an attempt to craft, if you will, some modifications to the rules to suggest what might be allowed and what might not be allowed. As a result of all that, we, in our wisdom or lack of wisdom, came up with this scheme that was described in the conditions in 2016, which turned out to be difficult to administer. The notion that the fairgrounds and the Ag Society could plan well in advance all the types of events that they might want to have and let us know well in advance what they were going to be turned out to be not very practicable. So that, I think, led the Ag Society to want to revisit this whole issue. I think noise associated with the events and the extent of the increasing frequency of events, it kind of started to evolve maybe back in even before 2016, but it all kind of came to a head that summer.
So basically, well, is someone here from the Ag Society? Why don't you step forward and help us with this?
I can try.
Okay.
You'll have to forgive me, I have allergies and new transitional lenses, so I can't even read or speak. We have had,
Sorry, your name?
I'm sorry, Gil Lombard, Guilford Agricultural Assistant. Gil Lombard, 37 Lovers Lane. I'm on the board of the Ag Society. The noise was a problem that we had from individuals who are here tonight, by the way. And my question to them would be, and I think it's important, in the past 3 years, I have heard no problems. And I'm asking that as a question. Were there any problems?
Recently, the last 3 or 4 weeks have been terrible. There was first, it started, I mean, they were all great organizations.
Actually, if
Okay,
you're going to make
I'm sorry.
Okay.
That was my fault.
You can throw that out when they have questions or
Comments later. She can
Okay.
come forward and speak.
So part of the problem is, I'd say 1/3 at least of all the events come, gee, I need something next week. I need something next month. All good organizations. One was Allison Varian, who passed away recently. And they had a clam and, again, pardon my voice, clam and oyster foundation that they made for a scholarship. That came right up. Had a lot of those. George gets them, then you get to approve them. I would say, George, would you say maybe 35, 40% were inside that 6 months that they dealt with anyway? And there were an awful lot of them. We've done everything we can. We try to follow the noise ordinance. We give them a copy of the noise ordinance. I don't know what else to say. This has been hashed over so many times that I haven't heard any complaints, and I would be the one that would be the end result.
The reluctance to just open the gates, though.
Yes and no. I think we're a great asset to the town. If I were there, I think one complaint that I had, and some of my board members are going to scream at me about it, was when the fire department was there, I think 4 weekends in a row, tearing cars apart and taking dump trucks apart and making a huge mess, putting a smoke bomb in a school bus that reverberated my windows because I am directly adjacent to it. I put up with it because it's part of the town. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, that we are a good steward of the town. We even had 2 airplanes land there. one when I was a kid.
Not by design,
No. But we've let the police department use it. We have Earth Day there. The town has, 4 times to my recollection, when we had problems with snow, they dump all the snow in there. 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was, when we had the storm and everybody was out of electricity for a couple of weeks, we had over 100 trucks in there every single day. Okay? I have 2 letters from neighbors, and I think you might have gotten them because they're all dated in July. But one's from Nancy Elderbaum, and 2 are from neighbors directly adjacent to the property. They've never had a problem with it. I was born basically next to it. The property that I have now was my parents'. My 2 brothers had the others. We grew up there. We're used to it, maybe. That might be the problem. But the total amount of noise is not constant that I know of, that I see. My property is right there. I can walk where the trailers are, where all the horses and such stay. I don't know what else to tell you. As I say, we've rehashed this many, many times. I'd rather be open for questions and try to help it that way.
I'm empathetic because I've talked to George about, some of the last-minute events that have come up, whether it be memorial-type events or quick road races. And I don't think that those are really the ones that cause concern for neighbors. And I think one of the things we might be able to do is work with George to craft something that better meets your desire for a shorter timeline on notification, but also addresses concerns from abutting neighbors as to frequency, amount, et cetera, as opposed to...
Well, truthfully, we believe this is this is our property, and we should be able to use our property.
But you're also in a residential zone.
Right, so
So
if,
it's commercial activity.
if they want to have a party every weekend with a band, I can't say anything. I don't really see a difference in it. I think we should be able to use it. I made a list over the years of, what we've had there. We've had concerts, we've had circuses, we've had the Fireman's Field Day, Airstream Club Jamboree, a Boy Scout Jamboree, a muster, many car shows, many craft shows, many dog shows, a horse pull, tractor pulls, fireworks for the town, school races, usually 3 a year, a Land Rover safety course, Lobster Fest, class reunions, weddings, the Taste of Shoreline, the fire department training that I mentioned, police department training, many other races of organizations. The neighbors park there when they have parties. We've had the Oktoberfest, we've had cattle shows. That's all I could remember. I don't remember any complaints. I've been part of the Ag Society for 25 years, and up until 4 years ago, or whatever it was, there were complaints. And I think it started specifically with the Oktoberfest. We met with the neighbors, with our attorney. We met with the selectmen, with them, and we just could not come to any resolution. And if you want to read Nancy Elderbaum's letter, I think it says what Mrs. Leet said at the last meeting. Do you recall that?
It was July, so.
Okay.
Long time ago.
Right. Anyway, that's really all I have to say. I think that we should be allowed to do what we do. I don't think we've had too many events. I think we had a total of 15, we'll have a total of 15 events this year. Many are races. A lot of them are done by 1 o'clock. So I'll take any questions or...
I have a couple, but any other questions from commissioners? Can I ask why you're asking for the restriction on not-for-profit oriented activities to be waived? So you can, I mean, the sum of all fears is like...
It opens it up.
Sure.
To make a few dollars on a race here and there.
Well, I mean, a race is not going to be a for-profit event, and I don't think anyone's worried about that. I think
No,
the
but
bigger concern is
But if you
a
limit
much
it...
more intense commercial activity.
Yeah, right. We had commercial things there over the past. We had the circuses, we had Land Rover. We had the Renaissance Fair before I was even involved in this. So, this is kind of was news to me at the time. Apparently, the special permit did not allow us to have for-profit events. I think that was in 1989, long before I was involved in it, and long before most of us knew anything about it. So what did we know? And there were no problems up until that, and we had more of those type events.
Is an element to this, to the complexion of this problem, that the surrounding neighbors have turned over enough that there's new blood and they're just not used to being close to the fairgrounds? I just wonder if that's part of the
I
problem.
think that, George, you can help me. The utilization has probably ramped up quite a bit in recent, call it the last 10 years versus the prior 10 to that.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. It turns over.
Okay.
Matter of fact, Kathy, isn't it turning over? You have your house for sale.
Yeah.
Question that was brought up at a prior meeting, and that was that a couple of neighbors were complaining about the barrels
Yes.
and the backhoe and all that stuff laying on the ground. I certainly understand their point that that should not be laying out on the ground, seeing you have sheds and so forth that should be moved off. It should not look like a farm. Did you take care of that yet?
We have not taken care of that. We plan on putting a fence across the barrels, the blue barrels that they did not like. As far as the machinery, that's machinery that we use.
I understand that you use those barrels on the road for people walking by during the fair and so forth. but is there any reason why they can't be removed and put inside the barn along with the tractor that doesn't run? Why would you build a fence around something that you don't need to build a fence around? Why wouldn't you put it inside the empty barns for the
I
time?
can certainly bring that up to the board.
What's that?
I said I can bring it up to our board. I don't have the ability to
I
give
think
you an
that's-
exact answer on
I
it.
think that would be something that the neighbors would certainly have a disagreement with if you're going to put a fence around it. When you could, how high are you going to put the fence? It's not higher than the bulldozer or the backhoe. You can't tell me you're going to put a 15-foot fence around it. So anyway, I think that would be something you might want to address. That was in a former meeting we had. The people brought it up that lived in the neighborhood. That's one of their points. Thank you.
At the previous meeting, the previous person from the Ag Society was talking about specific numbers of events per year. Is that no longer something that they're talking about? Or is that not part of this submission?
I do recall that being discussed. It's not part of their written request, but I believe that there was an indication of a specific number of events that they were talking about. I think it was 20.
It was like a change from 17 to 20 or something like
Yeah,
that?
there's no limit today in any of the conditions of approval
So it was
on the number of
they were
events.
proposing a condition.
They were. I don't remember exactly what that number was. And I don't know whether that's still part of their proposal or not.
The second question I had was actually for George. In the previous meeting, we were talking a bit about noise ordinances. Could you explain a little bit better about who's responsible in terms of the town when it comes to noise ordinances and enforcing that?
Right. There is a town noise ordinance. It's an ordinance adopted by the Board of Selectmen. It has limitations on the amount of noise that can be created associated with specific types of events, and it's enforced by the police department. The police department has trained personnel who can measure noise levels. There are specified noise levels in the ordinance, and they have the ability to ascertain with their equipment whether or not a specific event or not is compliant with the noise ordinance. One of the things that typically happens associated with large events where noise or music is going to be created and exceed the noise limits is that the Board of Selectmen can approve a waiver of the applicability of the noise ordinance upon an application for a specific event. So, for example, if there's going to be music at the fair, the fairgrounds would apply to the Board of Selectmen for an exemption or a waiver allowing them to have music exceeding the limit for that event. The Board of Selectmen can then put specific conditions of approval on that waiver, such as it has to be over by 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or whatever it might be. But that does fall under the Board of Selectmen and the police department and would be applicable to the fairgrounds events regardless of what we do with planning and zoning.
So the police show up, they have their audio recording or audio measuring device.
Right.
And it exceeds the approved levels.
Right.
It's a dB level.
What, do they write a ticket?
I think they order you to cease and
Shut it
desist
down.
right there.
And then if you say, it's my daughter's wedding,
They
and I'm gonna...
wrestle with it. They
You
wrestle
can-
with it. I mean,
I don't know, I mean, the police officer, I have personal experience with this, the police officers show up at your daughter's wedding and ask you to turn the music off or down. You know, they're carrying guns, and you typically say yes. You don't, it's very unlikely that you say, no, I'm not going to do that. So they do have the authority, as I understand it, to order you to cease and desist, and I think most people probably do. I mean, in a sense, though, you know, you could argue that the damage has already been done. You know, the noise has already occurred, but that's I believe, what happens.
George, procedurally, is this the right process to review a special permit?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Is this the right process to modify a special permit? Is this the only process to modify a special permit?
The applicant has requested a modification of the special permit. I think this is the correct process, and it's probably the only process. I think what Phil's alluding to is that they've made a specific request. You can respond to that request in a variety of ways, including attempting to formulate, at least this is my suggestion, attempting to formulate new conditions of approval that might be satisfactory to all parties concerned. That would be the ideal arrangement. The problem that we have right now is that the 1989 special permit is very vague as to what types of uses are allowed.
Well, all the uses have to be, all the other uses have to be associated with crafts fairs, agricultural events.
Right,
And
the only
nothing else
uses
is
that are
allowed.
allowed are agricultural fairs, craft shows, auto shows, and similar activities of a nonprofit nature. That's it.
Nothing else is allowed, based on the 89 permit.
It's that similar activities of a nonprofit nature that might be kind of open-ended. Our interpretation of, we've never really enforced these conditions. The way we attempted to enforce them through the 2016 amendment is to require that the applicant, the Fairgrounds, the Ag Society, give us a list of the events 6 months prior to when they're scheduled for, and then we would decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not it conforms to this standard. That turned out to be very difficult, impractical. Frequently, events were very community-oriented, that no one in the office was prepared to say, no, you can't do that. It's not an agricultural fair, craft show, auto show, or similar activity, such as a memorial event or fundraising for some noble cause, so that we have not really enforced these conditions. The 6-month list turned out to be very difficult as well, for the reasons that have been stated.
So if we were to look at modifying that and shorten the timeline, because as you're saying, events come up, it would still give us an opportunity to review it, but obviously not 6 months out. But I understand. You'd rather just have us go, we want to do what we want to do.
I've got to get in touch with Lisa. Lisa's got to get in touch with George. George has got to get in touch with you. In the meantime, who knows when the meeting is going to be? It could be out there. The people are trying to plan it. They're looking for venues. It just doesn't work. And I'm stuck with it.
I know, but they're coming to you last minute as well.
Yes.
So, I'm sorry that it's losing an opportunity for you, but they should have come to you earlier, if that's where they wanted to go. But
So
Yeah.
Gil, what would be a more reasonable time limit? 6 months sounds unreasonable. Is it 2 weeks? Is it 1 month? It can't be 5 days.
You mean when they want an event?
Well, just
I'm sorry.
a pre-notification so that the town could say yea or nay.
I don't know.
The condition is it's written, it's the Planning and Zoning Commission that's notified of the event 6 months in advance. Even if it's 6 hours, if it's 6 hours in advance, then the Planning and Zoning Commission's obviously not going to be able to review it in an expeditious manner. That then means that is somebody in the office supposed to review it and decide? That's kind of what we have done for the most part. But to my knowledge, we've never really even denied anything.
It sounds like
It's very hard to
purpose
do.
of the review has been specifically to whether or not it is in that list. Is that pretty much the purpose?
That's ostensibly the purpose, but it's probably not really a realistic purpose, because that list is so vague, or it's actually quite specific, except for the activities of a similar nature.
What I was asking was, there's no other, within the regulations that are currently there, there's no other specific conditions that you're reviewing it for?
Correct.
Beyond just whether or not it fits in that list?
Right, and we're not, within that list, there's no criteria that actually relate to the issues that are most of interest to the neighbors, like how loud's it going to be? I mean, you could have an auto show, that's, quite noisy, and that might be an undesirable thing, as opposed to, a road race. It's a fundraiser for Rotary on a Saturday morning. Clearly not one of these things that's listed. But, we routinely say yes, because nobody really cares. Pardon me?
They're a nonprofit, so they would be in there.
Right,
But I don't think any of this would have come up had we not had the Renaissance Fair. And I think that was the crux of it.
Not-for-profit. If it's not-for-profit, it fits
Yes.
because of that last three words.
That's probably one of the easier parts of this to actually enforce.
That is what our standard has been.
Right.
And I think today, or since July, the fairgrounds wants to open it up to any organization, and you're asking us to make that decision for you.
So in other words, it has been only for nonprofit use,
Yes.
and now they want to change it so they can have weddings and anything along with
Mr.
that?
Lombard,
Without having to come without,
It's not. I mean, I don't know anyone that made money out of it.
How does a wedding or...
No, we're not talking about that.
Yeah, have weddings been conducted there before?
Yes.
Yes, what I heard, yeah, and one of the big complaints I remember from the first meeting was that people seem most concerned about the music being repetitive of this wedding, one wedding after another after another. That seemed, what I picked up from the first meeting was people's concern about a not-for-profit event such as a wedding, and lots of them occurring. So then there was that discussion about limiting the number of events you could have there.
There seemed to be an evolution towards that, maybe as a more practical way of limiting activity, to limit the number of events, not worry about whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit, and to also limit the duration of events in terms of the evening activities. And if we were to do that, if the only things we limited were the number of events or the number of days that you could have an event there, maybe that would resolve the problem.
Here's what I see as a problem here. It was brought up that we do things for the town. Fireworks, that's for the town, all right? That doesn't happen but once a year, and everybody goes to it, so I can understand that. Dog shows don't end up at 10 o'clock at night. Horse shows don't end up 10 o'clock at night. Weddings do. Weddings make noise, so there's a big difference between the kind of shows that come up with, like dogs and horse shows and stuff like that, community things. That's one thing. But a private wedding is totally different. That affects the neighborhood an awful lot, the people that are living there. They have to listen to this, and everybody wants to have a good time, and we can understand that. But 10 o'clock at night, nobody wants to hear somebody howling and screaming and jumping up and down dancing. So that's what the problem, it sounds like that's what the problem is here. Are we going to allow these people are we going to allow you to have a wedding all summer long, every Saturday and Sunday or something like that? That could come, you can't say it isn't going to come, because if you're allowed to do it, people are going to have weddings, and they're going to plan them all the way along like they do everywhere else. So I think that's where the problem is.
I don't think that this is like a productive conversation. I think really what should happen here is the Guilford Ag Society should propose, what it is other than just whole cloth. We want to have free rein as to what's going on. We currently have a special permit on the regs or on your land record. So I would recommend that maybe you come back, or someone from the Ag Society come back with, this is exactly what we're looking for. We're looking to be able to do X, Y, and Z. We want to do 15, we want to do 20, we want to do 30 events. We anticipate those things to last from this time to this time. We never want to go above certain noise levels pursuant to whatever our regulations are. And I think that way you'll get a little bit more, or a little more reasonable feedback from the residents, and we'll be able to have a productive conversation rather than just guessing as to what's going on. So
I might suggest, I think George has a pretty good sense for, what the hamstring issues are on this. And if you were to work with him to come up and craft some, less onerous restrictions, as opposed to just tossing the baby out with the bathwater.
I thought we had that in.
I mean, it looks to me like, that you want the conditions from '89 tossed out and the conditions from 2016 tossed out. It's just a wholesale, get rid of the restrictions.
Yeah.
As far as the having to give planning and zoning, yes.
And use.
And use, yes.
So all the restrictions. I mean, those are the two restrictions, really.
Well, but you're adding one of the number of events.
So, like I said, if you want to work with George and bring us something that's a little more palatable, I sense that people want to try and help, but I don't sense that they're willing to just open the gates and say, just trust us. That's my take. But I'll kick this back. Are there any clarifying questions from audience members? Is there anyone here that would like, are you good with your presentation?
Yeah.
Sorry, just trying to keep it moving.
Questions if they have them.
Yep.
Okay.
Is there anyone here that would like to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone here that would like to speak against this application? Please step forward, state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
I'm Pete Perugini from 200 Whitfield Street. I've been here, I was here in 2016. I want to, if I can, just fill in a little bit of history. You guys appear to have very full understanding of the situation, but the noise, traffic, garbage, disruptive was all before 2016. There were issues. I, along with other neighbors, went in and approached George about the special permit to try to get an understanding. As he's expressed tonight, it's very poorly written. It was written in '89 with a certain set of expectations and a certain set of usage that was happening on there. It was pretty small, which is what you see. It was fairly restrictive. That's grown since 1989. It's a long period of time. The restrictions that were in there, not-for-profit is an entity that holds itself out not-for-profit, not an event that's not-for-profit, but it's probably meant to have been a 501c3, which is the Ag Society is a not-for-profit and similar organizations like that. It was probably put in there as a limiting factor to limit the number of events. To be very clear, I moved down there knowing that the fairground was back there. And I said this to the board before, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed going to events. I love being part of downtown. My issue has always been with further expansion. And clearly the two items that they're requesting to remove were items that the board put in, not that the residents were asking for at the time, but that the board put in because the residents met with the Ag Society and tried to come up multiple times with something that was agreed upon collectively with everybody that addressed the concerns. We know the Ag Society needs to make money. We want them to stay a private enterprise and keep the property up, and there's a lot of events there that the property's perfect for. A lot of town events, whether it be fireworks, if the fire department uses it, I don't have a problem with those uses. My concern, being close, is noise. The concerns of the neighbors that I spoke to on Lovers Lane and Boston Street are different. Some have concerns with traffic. Some have concerns with types of events bringing people in that they are concerned about safety issues. My concern has been noise. So a lot of you have heard the noise complaint come up. My understanding from the chief of police, when I went over there on how the noise ordinance is administered, is a resident makes a phone call, tells them there's been a noise complaint. They come out, they read with a decibel meter, a certain level of decibels. All that is a sound volume level. If you have a constant drumbeat, or if you have a constant machinery that's going off, that doesn't meet that decibel level, it's not an infraction, but it doesn't mean that it's not annoying. It still is it's a nuisance noise. It may not be a loud nuisance noise, but it's a nuisance noise. They then would tell you to, quiet down. They give you the chance to quiet down. If they do return to the property a second time, they have the ability to shut you down. That's what they'll probably do, is tell you you have to shut down, but it's a little bit of a waste of police resources to have these guys come in for that type of stuff. I, as a neighbor, have had plenty of things that have gone on there that have bothered me, but as a neighborly thing, and I've had many conversations with Gil, I don't pick up the telephone to call and complain. I I like what goes on there, and I want it to continue. I just don't want it to expand. And the changes that they requested are clearly for expansion. This is in the middle of a residential district. If this was a commercial application trying to go in there requesting even close to what they were requesting for, ZBA would shut them down immediately. So I have a letter that a couple of the neighbors signed from Boston Street, Whitfield Street, basically expressing that they love what the Ag Society does, they're supportive, but they're concerned about the application as it stands. And based on the conversations I've had with all of them, I'm sure they'd welcome another discussion on, something that could be more mutually beneficial than just eliminating all of the restrictions in the permit. So I'll leave these letters to be submitted. Thank you.
No, so we're done with your public hearing.
No matter what.
Correct, we've exhausted all the time on the public hearing.
So, where does that, do we have to close the public hearing?
Right. You don't have to make a decision.
No,
though.
You can close and table.
Yeah, but then we can't take any,
Can't take any.
we can't take any feedback
You can
from
take
the
only
act.
staff comments subsequent to closing the public hearing.
What I'm just concerned about is that we really are far apart on terms of like getting a good outline and working
And a good job. I
collaboratively.
mean, you hate to make someone run through the process again.
Yeah,
You might just have to
Right.
well, no, I understand that, but
Pardon, I didn't hear your comment.
I just said we'd have to make a decision with what's in front of us.
Yes, you don't have to make a decision tonight, but you do have to make a decision within 65 days of tonight, and you can't take any more public comment after tonight.
But we can take staff comments.
Correct.
Bart, would you like to?
Yes,
Make a comment.
I'll make it extremely brief. I spoke last time, and so everything I said then, Peter Flug at 158 Whitfield Street, and I also have a property for sale at 168 and 166 Whitfield Street. So everything that he said, everything I said last time, but I personally don't have a problem with lessening the six-month burden, 2 months, 3 months. That's all I have, guys.
Please step forward, Sarah.
Sarah Shrewsbury, 4 Hunter Drive, part of the Rollwood condo complex. And I was one of the neighbors who signed the letter that Peter and some others drafted. And I'm not sure if we have a count of how many neighbors submitted letters? Do you know?
Counted them.
Is there 20? Is there 500? Is there?
Closer to 20.
Okay, there's a number of my neighbors who asked, they said they couldn't come tonight, and they asked me to come and express their thoughts, which basically correlate with this letter. So for those who haven't seen this letter, I'm actually going to read it, if that's okay. Dear Mr. Johnson and the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, we are a group of neighbors who live in the neighborhood surrounding the fairgrounds. We are all very supportive of the mission and efforts of the Guilford Ag Society. We believe it plays a pivotal role in making Guilford a unique and wonderful place to live. We understand the organization is run by volunteers and thank them for donating their time and effort to continue the traditions of the Guilford Fair and other community events. We also understand that there are financial responsibilities involved in running the fair and maintaining and improving the fairgrounds. We appreciate that the Ag Society will have to rent the fairgrounds for certain events to earn the necessary income to continue to function and thrive. We believe, however, that there also must be clear and enforceable conditions in the special permit to ensure harmonious coexistence between the non-residential uses that take place on the fairground and the surrounding residential neighborhood. As you are aware, the Ag Society has requested multiple changes to the amendment of their special permit. These changes appear to be very broad in scope, remove the conditions added to strengthen the town's enforceability of the existing permit, expand the use of the property, and can include, among other things, large festivals and amplified sound and music with large number of people in attendance. As written, their request gives us cause for concern. We ask the Commission to consider the residential neighborhood surrounding the fairgrounds and take the balance of interests that need to be achieved to protect the neighborhood from excessive noise and traffic while maintaining our expectations of security and privacy. So again, a number of people have signed this and submitted them, so George has those, have those letters. And I appreciate your comment, Philip, about the attempt to find a middle ground, something between what we have now and just an open gate. I think that most people do not want the open gate policy. I also think that the Renaissance Fair was definitely a cause for concern. So that's it. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak against?
I was here last time. My name's Monty Crow. I live at 212 Whitfield Street, directly abutting the fairgrounds. So I echo what my neighbor Pete Perugini said. You know, the fairgrounds is in a residential district, but it's important to note they're also part of the historic district. And last time I entered into the public record what could be, you know, thought of as a memorandum of law, but it basically outlines, you know, how residential districts, historic districts interact with the surrounding neighborhood and the authority that this commission has in order to impose conditions on any use, particularly a special use. I want to reiterate that again because there was some misinformation last time. Somebody actually suggested that the fairgrounds has an exemption from the historic district regulations, and that's not true. The Ag Society fairground property has an exemption from the section of only the town ordinance, not the zoning code, the town ordinance that pertains to obtaining a certificate of appropriateness for a building that's being built within a historic district. But that's the only thing they're exempt from. They are not exempt from the application of zoning regulations and more specifically how the use of a piece of property within a historic district can adversely impact and affect your neighbors. And it's quite clear in our zoning code. It's even so clear that it specifically spells out that by definition, noise is an adverse effect on your neighbors. So you folks have ample authority to do whatever you deem appropriate and necessary to regulate that adverse effect and impact. The other thing I'd like to say is your point, Sean, was well made in that the makeup of the neighborhood has changed and it has turned over. You know, we weren't born on Whitfield Street, we weren't born down on Lover's Lane, but when all of us current occupants purchased our properties, we did so after, or at least we did, after doing our due diligence and research and understanding what was going to happen in our neighborhood. And at the time, the 1989 special use permit was the only thing that was on record. So then the 2016 one came out, and now they want to expand it again. And as you know, my neighbor properly said, you know, we love what goes on down there. We love the support that they give the community. We're not in favor of expanding it. We're obviously not in favor of giving them an open checkbook and carte blanche to do whatever they want in a residential zone that is part of a historic district. And I think if anybody has been around long enough, I've been around this town since back in the 1980s. I remember driving up and down our street, Whitfield Street, and it was in pretty sad shape, if you guys remember, if anybody lived here then. Huge investments have been made to rehabilitate almost every one of those properties. And we made those investments with certain expectations of what we could assume to be, you know, reasonable, quiet enjoyment of our properties. And that's all we're asking the commission to do. And I wholly support the idea that George come up and work with Gil and the members of their society and come up with a reasonable set of conditions, you know, number of events, number of days per year, how many of the events can be quote unquote noisy, and don't put the onus on the neighbors to call the police. The only way the police ever show up is if you pick up the phone and call them. So none of us want to do that. You want to be the bad guy, get that, noted in your record that, hey, Mr. Crow called the police 15 times because, too much noise being, emitting from the fairgrounds. So, don't make us the policemen. It's not why we're there. You wouldn't want to have to do that. When was the last time anybody called the police for their neighbors being too noisy? I mean, come on. Let's be reasonable on that too. So, with that, I'll just, thank you.
I'm Kathy Mack from 212 Whitfield Street, and I had told everyone, my husband, I told George, told Pete I wasn't going to speak tonight because I hate public speaking. I am a lawyer, but I am not good at public speaking. And like Gil, I don't have the right glasses, and I forget, and I can't remember what I've said, and so last time I went on and on and on. But these are the points I want to make. The submission that was put in on July 1st, or July 18th, 2018, was when I guess someone, maybe George, asked them to give a number of events because it was impossible not to do something with numbers, say any number of events. So they came up with 20, and that is excluding the town fireworks, town's Earth Day, school races, and the annual Guilford Fair. So if you start with weekends in May, June, July, August, September, like three of the weekends are fair occupied just because they're preparing. And then October, you get 24 days, So on weekends. So if they had 20 events, excluding the fair and the fireworks, every weekend, you as a neighbor could be having an event. And if whatever has to be crafted, and this crafting is going to be very difficult. The last planning and zoning did not make it specific enough or clear enough. But it's a hard thing to craft, and I'm afraid that if you just say, okay, 20 is too many, we'll say 10 events, but we're going to say an event because many of the events have been days long, like weekends long. The Renaissance Festival meant 3 different weekends. The Jazz Festival meant 3 different weekends. These were all things that violated that code, and that's why the neighbors were finally saying, oh my God, come on. And there was a cease and desist order put on the fairgrounds and they went, that doesn't have a lot of power or strength, I understand that. But we have to come up with a special permit that is true to our zoning regulations, which is that, there's one part of the zoning regulations I just love. It doesn't say that everyone should have, we have zoning to protect both people who are doing commercial work so that they can do their commercial work, and the residents so they can have a nice property and enjoy their property. And then there's coming to the nuisance where you move next to a pig farm, and then you're said, well, you can't then complain because you knew it was there. Well, all of us who have moved in, and I've lived there for 20-odd years, it wasn't a pig farm when we arrived. It was quiet. It had originally started on the town green and made its way over to the fairgrounds. They bought the property. I understand it's private property, but they're next to residential property. This is the densest area in Guilford. The quarter-acre zoning on Whitfield Street. Quarter acres, all you need. And then they have this big piece of 25 acres, and they want to do exactly what they want to do. They don't think there should be, and that's what Gil said, and I understand, but that's not what zoning does, and you cannot get a special permit that allows you to do whatever you want in a residential district. You might as well throw out the whole zoning code. So it's just, and I'm very frustrated because I and Pete met with Gil and his group for over, I don't know, was it, Gil? I don't think he enjoyed it either. It was like 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and they would not take our recommendations of limits to numbers and then also limits to the sound. So if you had 10 events, you can't, because I spoke to George today, one of the thoughts was maybe have 10 events, but planning and zoning doesn't want to be involved in establishing the noise. Because, you know, if you live 30 feet away from the property line and someone is drumming for 3 days celebrating Native American Hammonasset Indian Festival, which I was there, I thought, I'm supportive. I wanted to, because it's a great cause, but this was like 3 weeks ago, 2 days. But there was drumming for 2 days, and it's eventually you start, even if the people there didn't wanted it to stop, because it starts giving you a headache. So, and then the next, this is in response to your question, Gil, if recently there have been problems, because they were really good after they stopped after this new permit came in. They were very, very good for 2 years, and then we had the drumming, which was okay, and it was a great cause. Then the next day, another great cause, the next weekend, which was the cancer, and you bring your puppy and you walk around the fairgrounds, but there was a live band for a few hours. And so that's, even though it's a great cause, it's like a wedding. You're having live music right next to you. If I had had a party there, it would have been, if I wanted to plan my daughter's wedding, and I was the one who requested the 6-month, because if you're doing a family event at your property, you have no idea what they're going to be doing, and their event is probably going to be louder than your event. So, I mean, you have to learn to live together, and no restrictions is not fair. And
I think that, not to cut you off, but I
Yes.
think your point is well received and by the commission.
Okay, thank you. Let me just make sure, because I know we don't have that, I don't know whether we're going to have another chance to talk, because this might be the end.
This will be.
This will be the end?
We will close the public hearing on this evening,
And then make some decision?
potentially.
Okay. So I do think the purpose of zoning, okay, not pre-notification. I do think it's important to have a pre-notification in case my daughter wants to get married, that she can have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and one other thing. One other thing, just using George's case. He had one wedding. And the police were called. I have never called. None of us have called, because we all are trying to be supportive neighbors of the fairgrounds. But the thing is that if we don't have zoning, if what is crafted does not include some noise limit in saying that the planning and zoning has to look at these groups and say, are they noisy or not noisy? What's going to be happening there? It's going to be us who has to call the police. If, let's say you say 10 events, but no sound, no noise limits, we would have to be calling, and if they decided to do that, that would be every other weekend. We would be calling, if there are noisy, and if you have no restriction on noise, we could be calling every other weekend 10 times.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that's not the application that's before us. If they came before us with a different application, there might be some room to negotiate those things, but right now we kind of have a...
But what I'm saying is that it's not even fair to have to call once rather than call, to put the onus on the individual.
And just to that point, even if we were to be able to regulate noise, we're not out there. You still would have to call someone, and the police would be the enforcers. So no matter what, it's on the neighbors. Even if we were to, when we create special, if people are having blight in their property, the way that our zoning enforcement officer finds out about it is because the neighbor calls up. So no matter what we do, it would require the neighbor to notify the police.
Right, but for instance, the original zoning application said no musical events. There will be no concerts there. And so there are ways that zoning applications can put limits.
Let's say that they said no concerts, and then they put a concert in there. You would have to call someone up to notify us that a concert was there. It's still on you. No matter what, it's on you.
But, and the other thing I want, and this is it, I'm heading back to my seat. But the other thing is this, that, and then I get nervous and then I forget. Maybe there won't be, okay, never mind.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak against the application? With no further comment, Would someone like to close?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, where are we, George? Let's see, is it Rick Maynard? Application to be received?
You want a deliberation of public hearing?
Yep. And then, okay, can I get an approval of the revised agenda?
So moved.
Second, anyone? All in favor? Thank you. Application to be received is Rick Maynard, Nut Plains Road. They want us to. We want to do that? Can we deliberate on the two that we have and then go back?
Deliberate on 66 High Street, either take action or table, and you need to deliberate on the
Okay.
Ag Society, either take action or table.
Let's deliberate.
Right.
So let's talk about 66 High Street first. Comments?
I'm wondering about liability issues for the town if there's public access as opposed to.
It's not, I don't think it's town property. It's still their property. They just get to access it through. So if anything, the liability would fall to the condominium association. Is that correct?
Does someone want to make a motion or table it first before we go into deliberation?
Well, I'm going to make a motion anyway then. Vote that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission approve a special permit revision and coastal area management application for 66 High Street, Guilford LLC, map 321, lot 60-64, as shown on an application dated September 4th, 2018. And the quote, residents at 66 High Street, Planning and Zoning, CAM permit, end quote, 3 sheets dated September 4th, 2018, revised to 9/28/2018, prepared by Luch Consulting Engineers. This application is approved based upon a finding that it conforms with the zoning code and is consistent with the coastal management policy of the state of Connecticut. Special permit revision is effective October 26, 2018, upon filing with the town clerk.
Okay.
I'm not going to participate because I was at the last meeting.
Okay.
Do we want to put a provision on there that they conform with all the deep, what was it called?
I think the suggestion that Ron made was rather than table, that you include a condition that says something to the effect that no construction can occur, no work can begin until the DEP approval is obtained.
Yeah. Can I add that as the way George said it, or I have to repeat the whole thing?
If they agree to it, then that's okay. Then you're good.
All right, so we're going to add that the no permit will be issued until the DEP permit is granted, right?
Okay. Discussion? You want to have a discussion about public access? I do. So my initial thought is we approved this much, much larger, significant plan several years ago, and only because of the CAM application now are we even discussing the public access again. I think there are lots of accessible areas to view the marsh, and I think personally, putting the onus on the condominium association for a short stretch of walk, and then citing it as, public access, I think is putting a lot on the association, and adding a restriction for kind of a cleaning up the paperwork for putting blocks in a couple spots that they shouldn't have. That's my take, but I would like to hear what you guys think. And
You said it pretty good.
I agree. The strict definition of public access as requested by DEEP, as defined by the state, is unnecessary in this case and would put an unknown but potentially unwelcome burden on the neighborhood and also the condominiums. So they have made it pretty plain. I understand the residents' concern about having something more explicit in terms of a guarantee for their access to the property, but I think an open-ended public access is unwise.
I agree.
So should there be wording that they can't make a gated community about down the road, or?
I think they'd have to come back with a new site plan application to do something like that. So, you know. Josh, anything?
I'm not
Okay. Jason? Scott?
I agree.
Okay.
Do I vote now that, because he's out?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
So with that, we have a motion and a second. And we've agreed that we would not be including public access. So I'd call the vote. All in favor of approval of the CAM, but with the conditions noted and without the public access? All in favor? Aye. Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? I'll abstain. The motion passes. Okay. Gil,
Well, yeah,
he didn't watch the tape. Guilford Ag Society.
I would like to.
Do we have a motion there?
I would like to have a motion to table, and hopefully George can come up with a plan that can be articulated, and we can have a nice outline, and then from there, we can actually have a vote, because I think just us trying to piecemeal something would be a miserable
I don't
exercise.
sense that the applicant wants that.
Yeah,
I think they want a decision tonight, yay or nay. And if they want to come back with a new application, having worked with George on it, that was always their option.
That's what they might want, but we could make that decision for them right now.
Yeah, I don't think that they want us to just deny them right now, so. They could deny.
The difficulty doing that is, I agree that it puts the burden on, it puts the onus on them to come back with a new application. In the meantime, we have the current conditions of approval that we have to try to administer. The 2016 condition, which requires the 6-month notice, which is very difficult, as we all have made abundantly clear.
Does that mean then that if that remains in place, that absent 6 months' notice, they're not allowed to have any other events? Correct.
That's pretty much what it says, yeah. But that, we have not been enforcing that.
I'm not sure we can change it without reopening, we can't reopen the public hearing because we're done, we're at the timeline. So we can't amend the conditions of it.
If everybody agree, I think this is all a little bit, not totally the normal procedure, but if everybody agrees with whatever the revised conditions of approval are, then we're okay.
But we wouldn't be able to have public comment on it.
Correct. I would have to solicit the public comment, sort of as staff. So I would have to come back with a recommended set of conditions of approval, and I could convey to you that I think everybody's okay with this, or some people are okay, some people aren't, or whatever. There's still the...
Here's why. You could also convey to us that
Here's-
no one's okay with this, and we should just withdraw it.
You still have the ability to vote no on the special permit application, which is...
Modification of special permit.
Right, you can always do that. I guess what I would request is you give me a chance to come up with something that maybe I could cobble together and get some buy-in on the part of everybody. If I can't do that, you've got the option of either approving the request as heard or denying it. And
All right, so you're suggesting that we table until you can come up with something?
yeah, give me a chance to try to come up with something. If it can't,
I made a motion to table, so.
I second.
I'm in favor of trying to find some compromise that works for everyone. So I'll call the vote. All in favor of tabling?
Aye.
Okay. It is tabled till next meeting and the meeting after?
George
it'll keep coming up until it's either resolved or we get the 65 days. So
Okay.
I'll try to work on it expeditiously.
Thank you.
I don't think anybody's here for the Plains Park.
Okay. It was, in that case, we will move that to the next meeting. Table that to the next meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Subdivision, Thomas A. Stevenson Associates. Podunk Orchid Drive, map 94, lot 6, zone R5, 5-lot subdivision. Request to amend subdivision approving requiring fee in lieu of open space. I think I know why you're here.
Good evening, Chuck Mandel, agent for the applicant, Van Gogh. I have some revised plans based on Kevin McGee's letter, which you received a short while before I got here. Nice to look at. Essentially, my letter was, stand over here. Certain facts have come to light concerning our recently approved 5-lot subdivision and the one condition of approval, specifically the fee in lieu of open space. Based on an email dated 10/3/18 by Town Council Attorney Charles Andrus in regards to fee in lieu of, he states, accordingly, whether the commission can require an applicant to file a fee in lieu of open space is not wholly clear from the regulations. If the commission believes that it should definitely have such authority, I would recommend amending this provision of the regulations, unquote. We had discussions with town staff prior to our subdivision submittal for this subdivision, and it was determined that the land trust had no interest in any land acquisition from this parcel. It was our understanding our only option was a fee in lieu of approval, and my client agreed. Due to the ambiguity in the regulations, as stated by town council, we are requesting a modification of your June 20th, 2018 approval, and we are now requesting a waiver of a fee in lieu of and proposing to place a conservation restriction on the recently approved plan as submitted with this letter. And thank you very much. Also, there was a previous subdivision. It was Dennis Galoran, 222 Race Hill Road. And the commission, and I'm reading from your minutes from the public hearing, the commission feels the deed restriction makes sense. Mr. Benjamin agreed. And also, there was one other comment from that meeting. The applicant does not wish to pay a fee in lieu. As the current subdivision regulations cannot require a fee in lieu, it would be staff's recommendation that, one, instead of an undesirable open space dedication, the 1.25 acres by deed restricted to prevent future development, or two, the commission may waive the open space requirement altogether. And I don't have to submit that as an exhibit. I mean, you already have it as your record. The second subdivision was a previous land from Digliotti, and this was Long Hill Estates. The commission reviewed an email from attorney Chuck Andrus and decided to waive the fee in lieu of requirement. We also have a copy of your regulations. I mean, you guys know this. The open space requirement may, with the approval of the commission, be met through, this is 272-41-2D, some other arrangement that shall be found by the commission to be acceptable, and conservation easement was one of those conditions that was acceptable. I also received from Kevin McGee, you have a boilerplate conservation easement that's already set up that the town has approved, the town council has looked at, and I think the applicant's attorneys just kind of plug in who is going to, and that was also another exhibit, but you guys have that already. What we are proposing is almost 16%. Kevin was concerned about CLMP right-of-way, so we removed that part of the restriction from the right-of-way, and now it's just this hatched area that are on those plans now, with a strip going to the back from the street. And essentially, that's all I have requesting.
Question. In June, when we approved this?
Yes, sir.
You agreed to a fee in lieu of?
We were unaware. Oh, yes, yes,
I mean,
yes.
All
okay.
of this kind of developed in recent
yes,
time.
Yes, we did agree.
So they're really somewhat, whatever the precedent setting or not, decisions we made were well after your application.
Or after.
After the approval of your application and after the agreement.
That is correct, but nothing's been conveyed right now, so the land is still as is.
Is this the correct process to upset or to change a decision we've made?
How far back are we going to go on these?
Can we do this?
We don't have to go back on that, because according to our attorney, if I remember, we could either keep it or get rid of it, right?
Well, what's a little different here is that this application is already approved with the condition of the fee in lieu of. My understanding is the applicant can request that approval be modified, and that's what they're doing. The approval that was stipulated in June or whenever it was included the fee in lieu. They agreed to it. The subdivision, I believe the subdivision map's been filed, but they are, in light of what's happened since then, requesting that you reconsider the requirement for a fee in lieu of and allow them to do open space. So they're seeking a modification from that approved subdivision.
So I thought
I
there
believe
was a
they can
time
do
frame.
that.
I thought there was a 30 or 60-day time frame on a modification, otherwise they'd have to redo the whole process.
I'm not aware of any such time frame. In effect, they are redoing the process. They're asking for you to approve a modified version of the subdivision plan that was approved. If you do approve it, presumably they will file that, and that will be in lieu of the previous filed map. I guess they'll withdraw that filing.
And you're prompted to do this based on the meeting we had about the Long Hill Road property.
Actually, it all started with the Galoran subdivision, and my application was right after that, correct. And that triggered me I was under the understanding, based on town staff, that it was fee in lieu of, and that was the law. I think since nothing's been done on this subdivision yet, nothing's been conveyed, no money has changed hands yet on this. This is our one opportunity to come back for a modification of the conditions of approval.
I'll make a motion.
Please do.
I didn't see it in the, we heard of a letter from Kevin.
You read the letter and I'll make a motion.
Well, I can't find the letter. I see the letter from,
Keep in mind there, what did he say? What do you
well, I
got
got
here,
it.
like 4 minutes?
all right.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we hold letter, let Peter change the tape, and we'll come back. We'll do that in our business.
Josh, you got it?
I got it. Thank you.
You got to read it.
I'll read it. Real quick. This today? This letter from
Yes,
Kevin?
and we reacted to it.
Okay, great.
We're back on camera, so Josh has a letter he'd like to read from Kevin McGee.
Okay, this is from Kevin dated today, October 17th. The applicant is looking to amend the subdivision approval from fee in lieu of to a conservation easement during staff review of the proposed subdivision town staff meeting with the applicant for the subdivision, which showed a conservation easement similar to the one shown on the proposed plan dated October 12th, 2018, due to the location of the conservation easement with the CLNP right of way, the protections of open space is dedicated of land and or conservation easement would not be satisfied. Staff asked the applicant consider fee in lieu of land. The applicant agreed to this recommendation with the filing of plans without a conservation easement and the agreement for fee in lieu of land. It is important to note that that Attorney Charles Anders' letter was in response to the question regarding a subdivision on Long Hill Road and does not fully discuss subdivision code regarding open space dedication. Section 272-41, Parks, Recreation Areas, Open Space and Town Land, Subdivision A, general notes that as provided in GCS Section 825, every subdivision shall provide for dedication of land in order to protect and conserve natural features and resources, protect and conserve historic and other community resources, establish greenbelt and trails, provide for parks, playgrounds, and other activities in passive recreation areas, supplement existing open space areas, implement open space and other recommendations of the plan of conservation and development, and plan for open space and municipal lands. These open space requirements may, with approval of the commission, be met through dedication of land within the subdivision, fee in lieu of land donation dedicated of land, and fee in lieu of land donations or some other agreement that shall be found by the commission to be acceptable, such as streetscape, protection easements, trail easements, conservation easements. Section 27241B, dedication of land, states that land dedicated as open space shall contain at least 10% of the total area of the subdivision, preserve high-quality forest land, significant specimen trees, important animal or plant habitat, or of rare or endangered species, or protect special wetlands areas, scenic areas, or views in contiguous or with other open space, provide for walking, hiking, and or bike trails, reviewing the location and characteristics of the Parkwood subdivision. It does not meet the above criteria for dedication of open space, which includes dedication of land and conservation easements. All the land adjacent to the subdivision has already been subdivided, so there would be no land to connect the dedicated area to, and connect trails to the Inland Wetlands Commission. has not requested a conservation easement to protect the on-site wetlands. Prior to the approval of subdivision, the property was logged by the former owner, and a significant portion of the property to be dedicated contains a CLMP right-of-way. It is my recommendation that the commission does not change its approval from fee in lieu of to conservation easement, since the area shown for open space will not meet the purpose of section 27241B, dedication of land. I further request, based on the procedural concern by the applicant, that the commission request, in accordance to section 27241D, one, that the developer applicant pay a fee to the town in lieu of any requirement to provide land. If the commission is looking to approve a conservation easement, the applicant should be tabled, withdrawn until revised plans are submitted, shown the conservation easement out of the CLMP right-of-way. The applicant, as noted in section 27241B1F1, provide evidence that they have consulted with the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen has recommended that the town accept such land. The applicant shall specify in the plan an alternative disposition of the open space acceptable to the commission that shall apply in the event that the acceptance of the land is rejected by the town meeting or is otherwise not accepted by the town. As part of the Board of Selectmen review, they receive comments from town boards such as the Conservation Commission, Inland Wetlands Commission, and Land Acquisitions Commission. So have you received, so this was a recent change, have you received comment from the Board of Selectmen's office?
In regards to that, the past two subdivisions that were approved, the first selectman office was never, there were never letters submitted to the P&Z Commission. In the Guilford subdivision code, let's see, it's section 27241B, dedication of land, F, land shall be deeded in perpetuity, and applicant shall designate which entity is proposed to own the land to ensure its permanent protection. The following are acceptable to the grantees, and there are three that are acceptable to the grantees, not just the Board of Selectmen. One would be a recognized private, the town of Guilford, which would be the first selectman's office, which would go before the selectmen to be approved or denied. A recognized private organization legally constituted to accept and maintain, and three, a homeowners association. A copy of the homeowners deed and the bylaws of the association shall be submitted to the commission. So if the first selectman's office rejected this, and this was never a part of the approval process for the past two applications that were approved with waiving the fee, we would go to a homeowners association. So those are three that are acceptable by the town.
So I guess our inability to recognize and enforce our regulations shouldn't be a reason why we continue to do that, and we should just say that, you know, we could approve this with the condition it gets approved by the Board of Selectmen's office, and if it doesn't, then they would have to supply to us within a certain amount of time a homeowners association.
It doesn't have to be a homeowners association. It could, past practice has been that if this goes, if it's approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission as an easement to be conveyed to the town, goes through the town approval process through the Board of Selectmen and town meeting. If town meeting accepts the easement, then the easement is put in the form that was mentioned earlier, the standard easement form, and filed in the land records. If the town, through the Board of Selectmen and town meeting, reject accepting the easement, then the applicant has several other options, one of which is to create a homeowners association. Another of which, actually a more practical one, is to create a deed restriction on the property, which is filed in the land records, rather than an easement conveyed to someone. In fact, I think that would be our preference, unless the owner wants to create a homeowners association. I think we normally recommend against that, especially when you have 4 or 5 lots like this. The homeowners associations tend not to be very viable. If this was a condominium with hundreds of units, it would be a different thing. So I think what Kevin is suggesting, and the normal practice is, if you decide that you're going to modify your previous approval and give the applicant the option of creating the easement/deed restriction, he's proposing an easement, it goes through the conveyance process. If that's not accepted, and it goes back to them, and they translate that into a deed restriction, which then becomes the applicable control on that land.
So do we need to add a condition to this based on that process, or?
You'll see that we have two motions proposed here. One is to deny the applicant's request, the other is to approve it. If you do approve it, the wording that is expressed there is essentially what I just said. If the easement is not acceptable to the town should, or the town refuses, the area of the easement be revised to a deed restriction. Unless the applicant really wants to consider homeowners association in preference to a deed restriction.
No, that would be the least favorable.
Yeah, that would be the least desirable, right.
All right, so I'm going to, ready?
Pardon me?
Frank would like to make a
Can I make a
motion.
motion? Please, it's been exhausted at this point. So I'm voted that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission deny a revision to the Parkside Woods subdivision, map 94, lot 6, to eliminate the requirement for payment of a fee in lieu of open space for this application and substitute a conservation easement as shown on, quote, residential subdivision Parkside Woods, end quote. 4 sheets dated 4/27/18, revised to 10/12/18, prepared by Thomas A. Stevens and Associates. This proposed revision is denied based on the finding that the fee in lieu of open space was accepted by the applicant and is consistent with the Commission's interpretation of this regulation at the time of the subdivision approval.
I'll second it.
Discussion?
I'm going to vote against it.
Sure.
We have a process in place, and they found another way to do something, and they came in front of us, and it's acceptable if the town accepts the process, or there will be a deed restriction. So that's why I think it's acceptable. That's my opinion.
Okay.
I kind of think we had an agreement, this was all done properly, and we have a full approval, so.
Yeah. And we need to figure
And we
something
need,
out.
and we need to have a zoning committee meeting and tighten this one down.
Big time.
Scott, what do you think?
I think I would lean towards the process of letting the town officially decide whether or not they want the conveyance, as that's part of what's in our zoning code.
Yeah, I think we should probably bring it to the Board of Selectmen.
Kick in the can. I thought a deal was a deal, but, it's.
Well, let's do this, let me call the vote. So all those in favor, are we good with that?
Yeah.
All those in favor of denying the application?
Aye.
That's 4, and 3 against, the motion passes. Okay. All right, so all those against. Zoning Enforcement Officer report, anything to report, George?
Aaron's not here, and they table this for the next meeting.
Can I get a motion to approve the bills? Second?
Yes.
All in favor? Approving the bills?
Aye.
Thank you. With all business conducted and concluded, motion to adjourn?
Approval of minutes?
Approval of minutes would be good, too.
My name was I was present at the last meeting, and I wasn't there.
As stated at the beginning also, each applicant has the right to appeal the decisions to the Superior Court, if so desired. Just put that back on the record. Approval of minutes, we got a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Oh,